greatest players in the history of the game. I've never been around a player so unselfish, and a player that on and off the court has reflected what we would all want our kids to be like.
Fran Dunphy once said his position wasn't power forward, small forward, or two guard. His position was basketball player. Lionel Simmons had an innate feel for the game, never doing anything more or anything less than he needed to get the ball in the basket. He spent 4 years at Salle, where he put together one of the greatest college careers of all time, as one of the nation's top scorers and rebounders. He wasn't exclusively a shooter or exclusively a slasher, but he incorporated both into his game. And although he was playing undersized in college, the South Philly product had a toughness about him, which was shown in his rebounding numbers and all his points he scored close to the basket. And he made sure that he was well-rounded, as he put in the effort on defense too. He would get drafted to a Sacramento Kings team searching for direction and was expected to team up with Mitch Richmond. But after a few solid years, a bad knee essentially turned him into a bench warmer before forcing him into retirement before the age of 30. And nowadays, Lionel Simmons is a rarely uttered name in a forgotten period of Kings basketball. But the L Train's legacy in Philadelphia will never fade. Let's jog your memory. A Philadelphia native, Lionel Simmons attended South Philadelphia High School at a time where some of the best players in the nation were coming out of Philly. As a junior, Simmons would lead the Rams to the championship game before losing to Dobbins Technical High, led by Hank Gathers, Bo Kimball, and Doug Overton. But as a senior in '86, Simmons would lead the Rams to a Public League Boys Championship after putting up 21 points and 18 rebounds in a win over University City. But reportedly, after Simmons struggled to score at a high-profile camp, a lot of programs started looking elsewhere, but never LaSalle. And when his choices came down to Temple or LaSalle, he went with the Explorers, so he could play his natural forward position. As well, he felt he could earn early playing time. And as he would say in a later interview, he was always going to stay local. LaSalle wasn't exactly a powerhouse, with just 2 tournament appearances in the past decade, but they were looking to turn over a new leaf with Simmons as their prized recruit and a new head coach in Speedy Morris. The Explorers were coming off a 14-14 season and had lost top scorer Chip Greenberg to graduation, so Simmons was the focal point of the team from day one. But he did have a great shooter to help him out in junior Tim Legler. Although Simmons was more the size of a wing, at 6'7", he was one of LaSalle's biggest players, spending a lot of his time at the 4 or 5 and playing down low. As a freshman, Simmons would lead the Explorers in scoring, rebounding, and steals, as he would also be the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference's top rebounder and 3rd leading scorer. And Simmons' finesse and agility would really help him in getting up for offensive rebounds and putbacks. LaSalle wasn't great, but they were improved, and would go 5-1 in their final 6 games to end the regular season at 16-11. Their conference tourney was over quick after a quarterfinal loss to Fairfield, and while they didn't get a tournament bid, they would get an NIT invite, where they would make a memorable run. They would have close games versus Nova and Niagara before routing Illinois State and Arkansas Little Rock, but they would come up just short in the final versus Southern Mississippi, as they would lose by 4 points, even though Simmons led all scorers with 34 points. But Simmons' freshman year had ended with him averaging about 20.5 points, 10 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game. The 1988 season would see Simmons enter his name into the conversation of best players in the nation, and the Explorers would add freshman Doug Overton to the mix. LaSalle would again improve in '88, and it was led by Simmons. The sophomore would lead the conference in points, rebounds, and blocks per game. He was an offensive mismatch waiting to happen, as well he still had the strength and physicality in his game to post up and hit hooks or turnarounds. He also had the quickness to go by the bigger defenders, and a decent mid-range shot with underrated passing vision. And he would stay active on the defensive end, as he averaged over 2 steals and 2 blocks per game. Simmons was dominant all season and would earn a first-team all-conference selection, as well as be named Conference Player of the Year. And Simmons and the Explorers showed that they were legit, as Simmons would set a then Dean Smith Center single-game record with 37 points in a loss to number 4 UNC. Then in a January 14th game against number 4 ranked Temple, they would stay with the Owls all game and lose by just 3 points. Additionally, in 1988, LaSalle had made history, as they had already become the first team in MAAC history to go undefeated in regular season conference play at 14-0. And after defeating both Manhattan and Holy Cross in the conference tournament, they would get a chance to truly put together an undefeated MAAC season with a win over Fordham. And that's exactly what they would do, defeating the Rams by 9, as Simmons had 23 points, to not only secure the conference championship, but also a bid to the NCAA tournament. The Explorers were hot entering the tournament, as they won their last 15 games and had gone nearly 2 months without a loss, entering a first-round matchup with Mitch Richmond and Kansas State. But the Wildcats put on a shooting clinic, as they shot over 51% as a team, and LaSalle couldn't even crack 37%. Simmons was the Explorers' best performer with 20 points and 10 rebounds on 50% shooting, but it wasn't enough in a 13-point loss, as Simmons' sophomore year had seen him average about 23.5 points, 11.5 rebounds, and 2 steals per game. Legler had graduated prior to the '89 season, taking a lot of scoring with him, but LaSalle would make up for this with 5 players averaging double figures this season, and Overton taking a big step forward in year 2. But it was Simmons who stole the show. The junior forward would once again lead the team in scoring and rebounding, while also being the only player on the team to average at least a steal and block. Simmons was again the MAAC's top scorer and rebounder, but now his 28.4 points per game would be a program single-season record and had moved him up to a top 3 scorer in the nation, as he would again be named first-team All-MAAC and take home Conference Player of the Year honors, while even being named a consensus second-team All-American. With a great offensive attack, the Explorers jumped out to an 8-1 start on the season, which included a blowout win over 16th-ranked South Carolina. They would lose 2 in a row after that, but finish out the regular season going 15-2. As overall they would finish with a 23-5 regular season record and go 13-1 in conference play. They would again win the conference tourney, as after running through Fairfield and Fordham, they would meet St. Peter's in the final, who was the only team to give them a conference loss this season. But they would get their revenge, as Simmons would drop 29 in a double-digit victory, and for the first time in over 30 years, the Explorers were making consecutive tournament appearances. But again, the NCAA tournament was a different ballgame, and it didn't help that LaSalle's first-round opponent, Louisiana Tech, shot nearly 55% as a team and went 8 of 13 from deep, while LaSalle shot below 39%. Simmons was the clear defensive focus, and although Louisiana Tech were able to hold him to a below-average 12 of 26 from the field, he still finished with 26 points, 16 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 blocks. But they couldn't overcome the Bulldogs, as they lost by 11, with Simmons' season seeing him finish with averages of about 28.5 points, 11.5 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game. Simmons could have easily left for the NBA draft, but had made a promise to coach Speedy Morris that he would return as a senior, and that seemed like a good decision, as LaSalle was about to put together a dream season. Every game the 1990 LaSalle Explorers played would be an offensive onslaught, as they would finish as the 24th highest scoring team in the nation, behind the great guard play of Overton and Randy Woods, and the all-around dominance of Simmons. Simmons' numbers had dipped slightly, but teams knew to focus on him, and LaSalle was now far from a one-man show with the aforementioned guard tandem. Yet although Simmons averaged about 2 points less per game this year, he also took 2 less shots, as he went from shooting below 49% as a junior to above 51% as a senior. He would still lead the team and conference in scoring and rebounding, while averaging nearly 2 steals and 2 blocks per game. The team started on a tear, beginning the season at 8-0, before losing to a Hank Gathers and Bo Kimball-led Loyola Marymount team in a game which saw Simmons record 34 points and 19 rebounds. But after this, LaSalle ran the table, winning their final 18 games of the regular season, which included a February 10th victory over Manhattan, which saw Simmons go for 40 points and 14 rebounds. Then less than 2 weeks later, in another victory over Manhattan, Simmons would score his 3,000th career point, at the time becoming only the 3rd player in NCAA history to accomplish the feat. And with the Explorers finishing the regular season with a 26-1 record and ranked number 13 in the nation, it was only right that on top of another first-team All-Conference and Conference Player of the Year selection, Simmons would be named a consensus first-team All-American and National Player of the Year. LaSalle kept winning come the MAAC tournament, as Simmons would have 34-11 in a win over Fairfield, then 26-11 in a win over Siena. But during the win over Siena, Simmons and Overton were given the news that Loyola Marymount star Hank Gathers had collapsed on the court and eventually passed away. So Simmons and the Explorers were playing with Hank in their hearts during their conference championship matchup with Fordham the following day, and Simmons would honor his memory with 26 points and 16 rebounds in a win, as not only had LaSalle three-peated as MAAC champions, but for the first time in program history, they were making 3 consecutive trips to the NCAA tournament. LaSalle's 29-1 record was the best in the country and helped them get a 4 seed going into the tourney, as they would take on Southern Miss in round 1. And finally, Simmons would get the monkey off his back as the Explorers would get the win behind Simmons' 32 points, 16 rebounds, 3 steals, and 2 blocks, setting up a second-round matchup with Clemson. Simmons would pour in a game-high 28 points, along with 6 rebounds, 4 steals, and 2 blocks, but it just wasn't enough, as a hard-fought game saw Clemson win by 4, as Simmons' senior season had seen him average about 26.5 points, 11 rebounds, and 2 steals per game. Simmons was walking away from Salle and the NCAA with 3,217 total points and 1,429 total rebounds, making him the first player in history to finish his career with at least 3,000 points and 1,400 rebounds. But he had also played over 5,000 minutes during his 4-year college career, which was a lot of mileage on his body. But he was pro-ready, and it was no surprise that Simmons was being talked about as a possible top 5 pick.
Pick in the 1990 NBA draft, the Sacramento Kings select Lionel Simmons from LaSalle.
So it wasn't quite top 5, but Simmons wasn't complaining, and the Kings were desperately in need of a franchise number 1. They had shipped away their first overall pick from last year in Purvis Ellison, and were clearly looking to hand the reins to Simmons, but he didn't have much help on offense. The Kings did feature a solid power forward in Wayman Tisdale, but he would be limited to just 33 games this season, leaving Simmons and Antoine Carr to lead the team, as Simmons would finish as a top 3 scorer on the team as a rookie. He would hit double figures in 70 games and record 34 double-doubles, which included his career high of 42 points along with 12 rebounds in a March 23rd loss to Phoenix. Yet he would miss 3 games in early February due to one of the strangest and funniest injuries of all time. Simmons was still a 22-year-old kid fresh out of college, and while there were a lot of bad vices an NBA rookie could get drawn into, Simmons had one of the most innocent, with his being the Nintendo Game Boy. And due to playing his Game Boy so much this season, he would develop wrist and forearm tendonitis and miss 3 games in late February. But he seemed okay, as in his first game back, he went for 33 points. The 1990 draft was a weaker class, but nonetheless, Simmons was one of the league's best rookies, finishing second to Derrick Coleman in scoring, rebounding, and Rookie of the Year voting, yet still being named first team All-Rookie. And defensively, Simmons was the only King to average at least a steal and a block per game. But although the Kings were top 10 in points allowed, they scored the least points in the league, which led to a 25-57 record, as Simmons' rookie season had seen him average about 18 points, 9 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game. Over the offseason, the Kings had drafted Billy Owens out of Syracuse, but shortly before the beginning of the season, they were presented with an opportunity they had to take, as they would send Owens to the Golden State Warriors while receiving 4th-year Warriors star Mitch Richmond in return, as a wing duo of Richmond and Simmons actually gave the Kings some hope for the future. Then add in Tisdale coming back healthy, and there was cause for optimism in Sacktown. Simmons would see his scoring drop slightly, but this was understandable due to Richmond's arrival, a healthy Tisdale, and a career year from the newly acquired Spud Webb. Nonetheless, Simmons would finish as the team's 3rd leading scorer and would lead the team in rebounding for the 2nd straight season. And he would also see a jump in his efficiency, going from shooting about 42% as a rookie to 45.4% in year 2, which would also be a career high. And defensively, he would lead the team in both steals and blocks per game. Simmons would play and start in 78 games this season, hitting double figures in 70 of them, while recording 3 games with at least 30 points and 19 double-doubles. And he would have a great performance in a November 26th win over Phoenix, where he recorded his first career triple-double with 10 points, 14 rebounds, and 10 assists. The Kings had an underrated starting 5, but lacked depth, and although they were a middle-of-the-pack offense, they now featured one of the league's worst defenses, and dealt with coaching change, as after a 7-18 start, Dick Motta was fired and replaced with assistant Rex Hughes. But under Hughes, the Kings continued to underwhelm, going 22-35 to finish at 29-53 and miss the playoffs, as Simmons' year had seen him average about 17 points, 8 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game. Going into 93, the Kings had a new coach who they would stick with for a bit, in Gary St. Jean, and through the draft, they had added another great offensive forward in Walt Williams, as the Kings were going for a high-octane offense, with 1993 seeing them play at the league's fastest pace and score the 6th most points in the NBA. Simmons would finish as the team's 2nd leading scorer and top rebounder, while tying for 2nd on the team in steals, as he would hit double figures in 59 games, while having 4 games with at least 30 and 7 double-doubles. But Richmond would suffer a thumb injury in mid-February and miss the rest of the season. And although Simmons would perform at his usual rate, He didn't really up his play in the absence of Richmond, and while the Kings still had offense even without Richmond, they continued on as one of the league's worst defenses, and with that weakness, they would finish with a 25-57 record and miss the playoffs, as Simmons' year had seen him average about 18 points, 7 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. The '93 draft had seen the Kings pick up Bobby Hurley, though a near-fatal car accident would limit him to 19 games this season. The Kings would try to address their need for defense and toughness with a mid-season trade which saw them land big man Olden Polynice. Richmond was healthy again, and the trio of he, Simmons, and Tisdale reassumed their roles as the main scoring options. Yet Simmons would see his scoring drop to a then-career low, but he was still one of the team's top 2 rebounders while leading the team in steals per game, as his NBA career looked like it would be spent as more of a complementary scorer and solid two-way player, compared to the all-around star that he was in college. And that was fine, as he would still have 59 games in double figures, 15 double-doubles, and 1 triple-double. But what wasn't fine is that the Kings were not improving, again boasting a middle-of-the-pack offense and one of the worst defenses in the league, which led to a 28-54 finish and no postseason, as Simmons' year had seen him average about 15 points, 7.5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. At this point, Simmons was 4 years into his pro career and had yet to experience a 30-win season. But unfortunately, Simmons would have a much smaller impact on Kings winning for the remainder of his career. Simmons' knee had been bothering him, which may explain his production decline in '94. So prior to the '95 season, he would undergo arthroscopic knee surgery, which would sideline him until mid-December. And when he returned, the Kings were a respectable 11-8, as Walt Williams had stepped in as starting small forward. And even though the Kings lost Tisdale, they replaced him with rookie Brian Grant. So with the Kings operating well, Simmons would occupy a bench role for the remainder of the season, as he would appear in 58 games, but start just 3 of them. And his minutes would take a big hit, with his production taking an even bigger hit, as Simmons, who was never the quickest or most athletically gifted, was now slowed down more by his knee. But the Kings were improving. Their scoring had understandably dropped, but they were a much better defensive team, and Simmons would experience his first 30-win season as the Kings went 39-43, yet this still wouldn't be enough for the playoffs, as Simmons' season had seen him average about 5.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. Simmons' knee continued to deteriorate throughout the '96 season, as over the course of the year, he would miss 28 games. The sudden decline of Simmons, and Richmond hitting 30 years old this season, spelled the end of what once looked like a duo that could lead them to relevancy. Simmons would see his minutes decline again, and his overall shooting drop to below 40%, as he was forced to rely more on the outside shot, attempting 51 threes this season, after attempting 61 in his first 5 seasons combined. But he would make them at a respectable 37% clip. As the season wound down, the Kings were fighting for the West's final playoff spot, and a 4-1 finish to the year would give them another 39-43 record. But this time, it was good enough for the 8th seed, and a matchup with Seattle. And for a brief moment in this series, Simmons would turn back the clock. No one was expecting the Kings to beat the Sonics, but surprisingly, after a big Game 1 loss, they would steal Game 2 in Seattle, before losing Game 3 back in Sacramento. Up to this point, Simmons had scored a combined 14 points in the first 3 games, and had averaged just 10 minutes a night in Games 2 and 3. But then in Game 4, he came alive, as with Richmond going down with an injury in the first half, ending his night after 12 minutes of action, the Kings needed a spark, and Simmons, who had already started hot, continued on with a great game, which saw him play 35 minutes and lead the Kings with 24 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 blocks. But the Sonics were just too good, as they would win by 14 to take the series, with Simmons' season seeing him average about 4.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. The '97 Kings had a team full of hardworking guys that you could get behind, but the once promising Simmons had become nothing but an afterthought, yet he would still make appearances in the Kings' first 20 games, putting up modest numbers, until a second surgery to his knee in early December would keep him out for 2 months. He would return to play in 21 of Sacramento's final 26 games, but now nearly all the athleticism and mobility that he had left before the second surgery was gone. And while the Kings were respectable, they would still manage just a 34-48 record and miss the playoffs, with Simmons' year seeing him average about 3.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. But prior to the '98 season, Simmons got word that he would have to do more rehab on his knee. Simmons' knee had prevented him from participating in training camp or any preseason games. And after team doctors told him that he would need to undergo additional rehab on his knee, he made the difficult decision to retire just weeks before his 29th birthday, as he would acknowledge that he couldn't perform at the level he was used to due to his knee not being healthy enough to allow him to compete at the NBA level. Lionel Simmons is another player on the long list of sports what-ifs. There was no doubt he could do it all on the court, putting together one of the most dominant NCAA careers of all time. And he did so without relying on being bigger, stronger, or faster. He just knew how to get to his spots and convert when he got there. He lifted the LaSalle Explorers after a down period and was then looked at as a player who could bring the Sacramento Kings to relevance. And he showed that as one of the league's top rookies. When Mitch Richmond got there, Simmons seemed to settle into more of a complementary role, doing a bit of everything while Richmond was the #1 option. And that was okay, because Lionel Simmons was a player who could impact the game in many ways, whether it was scoring, rebounding, defense, or even pushing the ball in transition. But the Kings were stuck in neutral during Simmons' best years, and then his knee failed him much too early. He drew a bad hand, and you can't fault him for that. He tried his hardest to play through the pain and deliver for Kings fans, without once complaining. And when he was healthy, you had to watch out for the L train. But that's it for today's episode on Lionel Simmons. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on one of his Sacramento Kings running mates, or this one on his 1990 draft mate. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.